For joining us for our first Superior on Tap of the new year. My name is Chris Krause. I am the new Outreach Coordinator for Citizens for Safe and Clean Lake Superior. Excited to be a part of the team. I'd like to ask any of the team members who are here tonight to stand up, and if we've got any board members here to stand up, please. Just wanted to give them a quick round of applause for all the work they do on behalf of Lake Superior. Thank you guys. Citizens for Safe and Clean Lake Superior was founded in 2020 by a small yet mighty group of local residents to work on stopping the proposed industrial rocket launch project along the shore of Lake Superior near Granite Loma, and we're successful. Yay! Over the past 6 years, we've expanded our advocacy efforts, and we continue to give the Great Lake a strong voice. Our ongoing efforts have helped keep 50 million Michigan taxpayer dollars from funding the Copperwood mine. And our current focus is on wetlands protection policy, vape recycling, and environmental education. We believe that collaborating within the community is the key to success for all environmental projects that we're working on. And to that end, we are very grateful to be working with Trout Unlimited tonight. Tonight's topic is Coldwater conservation. And whether you enjoy fly fishing in clean and clear streams, or just appreciate the view and the ecological value of clean and clear streams, we have Trout Unlimited to thank. With over 400 chapters and 300,000 members, they are the leading organization in the fight to protect rivers, streams, and public lands across the U.S. Tonight, we'll be learning about the important work that they do in 3 segments. First, Emma Balliet, project coordinator for TU's Great Lakes program, will speak about from the national perspective. Emma graduated from WMU in 2021 with a bachelor's degree in freshwater science and sustainability, and has had the pleasure of working for TU and the privilege of calling Marquette home since graduating. Emma has always been an outdoor fanatic and a passionate conservationist. She spends her free time hiking and paddling around the UP, and is proud to have chosen a career that allows her to be outside while working to conserve and restore our precious Coldwater rivers and streams. After Emma, we'll hear about a local restoration project from John Highlen. John is a conservation chair for the local Fred-Waara chapter of Trout Unlimited. As a lifelong lover of the outdoors, John has been enjoying Michigan's forests, fields, and waterways for more than 60 years. Good times. That makes him feel right at home with wild lakes, streams, and wetlands. In 2016, he traded an engineering career for the life of outdoor adventurer, writer, and conservationist, focusing his energy right here in the UP. And last, but certainly not least, we will hear from Connor Ford. Connor is a graduate student at Michigan Tech in the biology department and the 2025 Fred-Waara Trout Unlimited Klitzman-Waara Fellowship Award recipient. His master's thesis, which he plans to complete and defend later this year, focuses on how stream bed substrate composition influences macroinvertebrate communities and why these relationships matter for stream management. Connor has prior field experience in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, where he assisted with ecological surveys to assess human impacts on stream ecosystems. And in his free time, I can't believe you have any free time, Connor, he enjoys camping and rock hounding, learning about history, and this sounds really good to me, sharing baked goods with friends. So we hope he considers us to be friends after this evening. So let's give a warm round of applause for Emma.
All right, thank you so much for having us this evening. We are all super stoked to present, oh my goodness, our work to you. I love Superior on Tap and Science on Tap and attend all of these events religiously. So how cool to be able to present at one. Chris already gave us our wonderful intros, so just highlighting that I'm here representing the national nonprofit organization, Trout Unlimited, in the Great Lakes program in the Upper Peninsula specifically. And then you'll hear from John, who's going to talk from a very local, volunteer-led chapter perspective, and then super cool to hear from Connor in his graduate research, which he received a grant from the Fred Waara chapter to support that graduate research. All right. And this is a cute photo of John and I at a tree planting last spring. Also highlighting Ellen Rickles, a hydrologist on the Hiawatha, who is here tonight. Give it up for Ellen. Drove all the way from Munising in this weird sleet snow. Love her. Me again, pre-braces. I'm a project coordinator for the Great Lakes program. In a nutshell, I basically manage our science and monitoring all over the UP. I'm a seasonal technician turned full-time, which is super cool and kind of rare in the conservation world. So I'm very lucky and very happy to be based here in Marquette and work across the UP. I have about 20 minutes and I'm going to try to whip through an overview of TU, the Great Lakes program, and our work specifically in the UP, our science and monitoring, highlighting the Great Lakes road stream crossing inventory, a little bit about brook trout, and then show you some cool photos of a sweet project on the west side of the UP. So, Chris also gave a really nice intro to who TU is. We are a leader in cold water conservation. We focus on protecting, conserving, and restoring cold water ecosystems and their watersheds, specifically with native salmon and trout populations, depending on which region you're in. This map that I copy and pasted and redid geography a little bit to fit shows us different areas across the US where we are working right now. We have an Appalachian program, Great Lakes. The Driftless is out on their own there in southern Wisconsin. A Rocky Mountain program, Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and California. So basically everywhere where there's cold water and trout and salmon. TU was established in 1959 by some passionate anglers who happened to be hanging out on the banks of the Au River in Grayling, Michigan, if you're familiar, so kind of cool that we originated here. They saw a need for conservation and protection of their local waters. They created TU, started to gain some traction. Other surrounding states kind of followed suit. More chapters were created, and then those chapters started to hire employees. And now we've exploded in the last 66, 67 years into this huge nationwide nonprofit with over 350 employees. Then we have the volunteer arm that is consisting of over 300,000 members in 400 chapters. For employees, we've got scientists, fish biologists, policy experts, government affairs people, lawyers, journalists, all of the things. In Michigan specifically, we have 19 of those chapters, and in the UP, we have 2. Both of our local chapters are very active and amazing to work with, and we wouldn't be able to do the work we do without them. All right. One other thing to highlight is we do a ton of advocacy work at the national level. This is just a screenshot of our Take Action page on our website, but we have people in DC every day pressuring legislators to not take away the roadless rule, not dismantle the Clean Water Act, not sell off public lands, and we make it very easy to click a few buttons and have a pre-populated message to send to your specific representative. So very important in these times, I'll say, to be doing this work. So zooming in on the Great Lakes, we have 13 full-time staff members here. We're broken up into northern Wisconsin, the UP, and the Lower Peninsula. In the UP specifically, we have myself and then my supervisor, Sarah. She couldn't be here tonight, but she has more of a desk role where she manages all of our projects and budgeting and grant writing, and I get to go crawl through streams all day, so it's a good gig. Each year I hire about 4 seasonals to assist me in all of our stream monitoring. There is one of those people in the crowd tonight. Put your hand up if you feel like it, Madison. Oh, way in the back. Madison worked for me last summer. We love her. And then we have Bob as well, who was one of my partners my first summer as a seasonal. Bob. So that's pretty cool to see them. Also, we posted our available positions for this upcoming summer yesterday, so if you're looking for a really fun job this year, apply. This is just a quick little snippet of where we went this past summer. Most of the rivers we surveyed, as you can see, we cover the whole UP, a lot of windshield time as we call it. Yeah, we travel a lot. We crawl through a lot of rivers. I broke our fieldwork up into 3 sections, which is not covering everything, but basically we do a lot of fish population surveys accompanied by habitat assessments and macroinvertebrate sampling. And for that, we electrofish. We do this before and after a restoration project so that we have evidence to show funders and just scientific integrity that our restoration work is benefiting the ecosystem. We also have a coaster brook trout thing going on with the DNR right now, where we go out in the fall and survey Lake Superior, South Shore tributaries for presence and absence of brook trout. And then if there are brook trout, we take tissue samples and send them off to MSU. Don't ask me questions about this because I'm not a carbon isotope lab person, but you can look at the carbon isotope signatures on the tissues of the brook trout, and that will tell you where they're eating, whether they're eating only in the stream or if they have decided to take a little migration out into the big lake. I don't know why some choose to do that and why some choose to stay in the stream, but the ones that go into the lake generally grow much larger, and they're not genetically different from the stream resident brook trout, just their life history is different, but that's our best to date non-lethal way of differentiating between the two. So we're helping with that with the DNR. And then we have the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory, which is the biggest haul, the thing we've spent the most time on as a team for sure. And that's going to be something that was created by the DNR in 2020. Back in the day, we built roads everywhere, to everything. And anytime a road crosses a stream, we put a structure beneath it, that whether that was a bridge or a culvert or a dam. And we kept no record of these things and what condition they were in, what size they're in, the effect they're having on the stream beneath it, the integrity of the road. So the DNR thought it would be a good idea to go out and inventory, first and foremost, where all of these road stream crossings are, and then while you're there, also perform an assessment on the integrity of the road, the condition of the structure, and the stream around it. This is a screenshot of the database for the road stream crossing inventory. So every symbol represents a road stream crossing inventory assessment that has been completed. We put up a couple hundred of these each year, and there's so many agencies across the Great Lakes Basin participating in this inventory. It's super, super important for prioritization of restoration work. Obviously, we want to take care of the worst road stream crossings first. When you do the assessment, you're taking all sorts of different measurements, and it pumps out a couple different scores. This score is the one that is most important to our work, aquatic passability. So that's telling us, is this culvert, primarily they're culverts that are the problem, is this culvert creating an issue to where all the aquatic organisms are fragmented and cannot pass through the structure, can't access upstream habitat? This is showing that of the structures that have been fully assessed, there's a bunch that have been not assessed because some organizations just go out and mark where there are crossings and don't perform the assessment. That 17% of them are barriers all the time, and they're fragmenting the stream, and that can be an issue for a number of reasons. This is just showing that almost all of the crossings, 80% of them that have been inventoried, are culverts. So that's our big thing at TU in the UP, is replacing culverts with properly sized and properly designed structures. So this is just illustrating why when culverts are undersized, placed too high, they constrict the stream and they slow the water above it, which warms it, and then it's kind of like putting your finger over a hose, creates like a very high velocity like spray effect on the outlet, and fish can't get up that. Also, it will generally create shallow water that fish can't swim through, and macroinvertebrates and turtles. If the culvert is placed too high, then it's perched and fish can't jump up and swim through. And also, if they are undersized for the stream, it can't pass normal debris and it gets plugged, and that obviously creates a full barrier. This is just another little graphic illustrating what not to do. This culvert's set way too high. It's fragmenting the stream. The fish can't access their upstream habitat to spawn, to get away from the warmer temperatures in the summer. And then on the bottom here we have the properly sized culvert, and the fish can swim through, and we build a bed and banks. We build a bed and banks through the culvert as well to mimic the up and downstream habitat, to try to make it as natural as possible. Also, undersized culverts are bad for people. At TU, we're more nature focused, but I guess I could talk about the bad effects on human life as well. If a culvert is undersized and a big flash flood comes through, these are photos from the Father's Day flood of 2018 up in the Keweenaw. The culverts can fail and the roads will buckle, and that's a huge economic cost for the local town, and can make people not be able to get where they need to go. Okay, so why do I keep talking about brook trout? Why are they so cool? They're our state fish, number one. They're also our only native stream resident trout. They are an indicator species, so they tell us that the water is cold and clean. And they're also beautiful. They're a prized game fish, which drives tourism. And in our world, you need to put an economic value on basically everything, for better or worse. So if people love fishing, people love fish, then therefore they love the rivers and are driven to protect those rivers, drives dollars towards restoration work. It's a whole circle. Coaster brook trout, which I sort of explained, are not genetically different from stream resident brook trout. They just feed in Lake Superior as well, which makes them grow much larger. They're trophy fish. They've kind of re-entered the chat as of late in the conservation world because they're a fun thing to get people excited about and drive more dollars and policy towards helping with restoration. If we can restore this population that used to be abundant in the Great Lakes, or not in Lake Superior, but now is not because of overfishing. So if we can direct dollars to restore the population and restore the rivers that they're accessing and figure that all out, it's great for everybody. Okay, now I'll jump in sort of non-fluidly into a specific project, bring this all together. This is Trout Creek in the western UP. This project came to us. We knew historically this stream is full of brook trout. It's cold, clean water. It has this full barrier, 2 tiny perched culverts. Before we got to this point, this is the very beginning of construction, but before we got to this point, we've conducted a road stream crossing inventory on this site. We've done a fish survey, a bug survey, a habitat survey. We've got all of our ducks in the row. We've done permitting. We've bid this project out and hired a contractor who has stream restoration experience, which are few and far between in the UP, if you can imagine. Then we also go out and do a geomorphologic survey with those little yellow survey tripods you've probably seen on a road somewhere, and that allows us to, the engineers, not us, to rebuild the stream in AutoCAD and design a proper replacement for this. Funding for this project came from bipartisan infrastructure law money, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and a few other sources, and it was in partnership with the Ottawa National Forest and the Ontonagon Road Commission. So these culverts are full barriers at all flows. We don't really need to do an assessment to see that. Fish can't swim through there. The velocity's super high. It's scouring out a whole pool on the downstream side. This is us doing one of the geomorphologic surveys, and this is a cross-section of what the river looks like that you can build with those points that we're out taking. The bottom there is the bottom of the stream, and then you can see the banks, and then the floodplain goes out on either side. So they use that to build the stream through the culvert and mimic what's going on around. This is just a quick snippet of blueprints I can sort of read sometimes about how we're gonna replace those 2 culverts with this big, beautiful culvert that can pass fish, and we build a stream through it, and everything's wonderful. This is just saying we're gonna do a 14-foot, 3-inch span culvert that's 9 feet, 7 inches tall, and here's what we're gonna put in there as far as bed material, and this is the stream we're trying to match it to on the outside, and this is the zone of disturbance, etc. Okay, now cool pictures. This is them getting to work, we're blocking off the stream and creating a diversion channel so that they can keep the area dry while they're replacing the culverts. This is taking the yucky culverts out. Here we're digging, we've got the water diversion in full swing. We're done digging and we're checking elevations, make sure everything is good to go. We always have an engineer on site from our team to make sure things are going as they should. This is the giant culvert that's replacing those two baby culverts, so you can see this is what's supposed to be there in order for the stream to be natural as it can be and compared to what was there. This is us next to the culvert. For comparison, you could literally drive a car through it. This is the culvert on its journey down the road. This is the culvert in place. I don't know if this will play. This is just a quick video illustrating that we bury the culvert below the stream bed so that we can fill in a bed and banks and make it match the grade of the surrounding stream. You can see the water diversion. Our engineer is also a sick drone pilot. Pretty cool. This is showing how kind of high the water is and how the culvert is buried again, really driving that point in. Here's from inside the culvert before we built the bed and banks. And then that's putting the stream material in, and these are after we've released the water and the stream is flowing again. And then unfortunately, he didn't go back and get post shots with the drone. I'm not sure why we dropped the ball on that. These are just iPhone shots of the after. But now the stream is reconnected. Fish and aquatic organisms can pass through. It's aligned properly with the way the stream goes. This is matting that is kind of erosion control, and it's biodegradable and filled with the seed mix prescribed by the Forest Service, so that will all bloom. It has bloomed. This was in 2023. This project took 5 weeks. It was $300,000, just to give you an idea of how expensive these projects are, and this was a smaller scale project for us, and funded by bipartisan infrastructure law money, like I said. Okay. That's it from me. Now we're going to hear from John Highlen.
Yeah. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit. What I want to do is talk about a local project. Emma talked a little bit about a culvert replacement. I'm going to talk about some work that we did on a bridge, except not the bridge itself, but the bridge crossing. So we work on a lot of different things. The local chapter here, let me give you, there we go. What are we doing here? Technical difficulties, hang on just a second. There we go. Perfect, okay. Just real quick, this is just a quick slide. From a Trout Unlimited standpoint, the local Fred Wara chapter, we cover about 2/3 of the UP. Marquette County, Iron County, and everything to the east. So this just gives you a real, when it's up there, it gives you a real quick snapshot of some of the projects and some of the things we have going on. And just to let you know, this actually is missing about 30 temperature logger locations that we actually have as well. So anyway, we got a lot of stuff going on in the UP. What I want to focus on this evening is the project I mentioned with a bridge stream crossing on the Hurricane River over in the Pictured Rocks National Lake Shore. I'm sure most everybody's aware of the Pictured Rocks, and most everybody's probably been there as well. Well, what we've got, this is the Hurricane River. Nice looking bridge, right? Well, what happened is a number of years ago, when the road commission replaced this bridge, they had a little extra money. So they put in a 48-foot span bridge. The river naturally in this area is about 25 feet wide. Guess how wide the river was underneath the bridge? 48 feet. So what would happen is, a lot of times in the summertime, especially you get to August, September, whatever, what you had was about an inch of water running over a sandbar underneath the bridge. Worst case, I've seen it before where you have a bunch of little braided channels about an inch deep snaking around the sandbar underneath the bridge. So it was a complete fish barrier. So this was brought to our attention by the DNR, and we worked with them, we worked with Park Service and a number of other folks. And so what we did, you can see the stakes here with the orange ribbons on them. That's where the riverbank should be. So what we did is we came in a lot different than the project Emma talked about, where it was a $300,000 project, a lot of heavy equipment you saw and things like that. This was literally, other than the truck to bring a load of stone for us, this is purely a hands-on project with volunteers. So it cost us whatever it cost for the load of stone. That was it. Everything else is volunteer time, volunteer hours. So what we did is we used a technique we've used a number of times using brush bundles. Now I don't know if anybody's heard of brush bundles before, how that works. Basically all you're doing is you're taking a local native brush, using the brush to build up where the bank should be, filling up where the bank should be, to bring that bank back out to where it should be the bank for the river. And you stake it down in place, it holds in place and stuff. What happens is, in the spring, especially when the water levels are high, it's full of sand and silt and things, that water infiltrates that brush, it slows down and it drops the sediment. So that brush starts filling up with sand and sediment and things. And what we found is over a couple of seasons, that brush becomes the bank. It becomes filled up with sand and things like that, and it becomes the bank. So the very low key, it's all local stuff, so that's what we decided to do on here. It worked well because this particular river is not very flashy. It's not, if you notice, it's not a real high gradient. It's not a real fast, flowing stream. It also does not drain a huge drainage, where in the spring when you get the runoff, it just gushes through there. It's a very low-key, very mellow stream, so we're able to get away with doing that on this. So what we did, this is pulling the rocks. Here you can see we're building, under the bridge here is going to be the brush bundles. We're building some kind of rock noses out front to take the brunt of the current when it does come down before it hits the brush. This is all natural rock that we got locally from one of the gravel pits. We hand hauled about 15 tons of rocks from the parking lot down to the river and put them in place. So this is a 2-day project too, just to give you an idea. So that's how most of the rocks are hauled in that sled right there, or literally picking up one rock at a time by hand and hauling them down and putting them in place. So about 15 tons of rocks were put in place like that. We hauled brush from a local logging operation, handful, like maybe 10 miles down the road. It's all local brush, again, free brush. We hauled and put in place about 9 heaping truckloads of brush for the project as well. This just gives you a little bit of a shot. You can start to see the brush in place a little bit on the left side of the screen over there. You can see the size of the brush. That's probably an average size, a lot of the brush that we're using. And again, you're just filling up. Normally you would stake this down with natural wood stakes so that the stakes eventually rot away and disappear. And we use natural fiber twine to kind of intertwine between some stakes and hold the brush down again so it doesn't want to float away on you when you get the high water come in and stuff. And again, within a season or so, it'll decompose and be gone. So when it's all said and done, you have riverbank there, is all you have there. So yeah, you can see we've got the one brush bundle there. Notice here too, the sand in the middle. When we first started, there was about a 6 or 8 foot wide sandbar that ran all the way underneath the bridge. So it was about 50 feet long by 6 or 8 feet wide, right in the middle of the river. So one thing you notice, the brush bundles are in place here. You see the sand in front of them. Notice behind them, it's already going to gravel. This is day one. So that's one of the kind of neat things about this project. A lot of times when we do some of these projects, whether it's tree plantings or other things, sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years before you really start to see any results. The first day we started working on the project, we were seeing results in the river. It was already, the water level, with the brush was forcing the flow into the center of the stream. The water level was coming up. It took all that sand right off there, so that when we finished the project, within a couple of hours, that was gone. The sand was all completely washed away and gone. So This is the other side. Again, you notice how the brush, it's pretty thick, packed in there. The other thing we did on this, and you can see the sandbar down in here too still. The other thing we did on this was a little bit different because there was a lot of gravel just under the sand here, so it's very difficult to pound stakes in like we would normally pound stakes in to anchor things. We anchored this primarily with logs. Put logs on the very inside and very outside of where we wanted the brush bundles, and we tied off the twine to those logs instead of having to try to pound sizable stakes in there. This gives you a little bit better feel as we're finished up. The project's pretty much done here. You can see the nice rock nose on both sides kind of leading the river in there, narrowing it down and leading it in. You can see the brush. Notice that they're not identical widths. What we did is we matched where the river naturally wanted to flow because the way they located the bridge, it wasn't really centered over the river. So we adjusted the brush bundles accordingly so you're not fighting nature, right? Otherwise what happens is if you put them in the wrong spot, the river's going to move them. It's going to put them where it wants to put them. So if you notice, we have a real wide one on the right side and a very narrow brush bundle on the left side. So this is basically the project is all done. And if you notice, again, you look down the center, there's one little spot right there that you can still see just a little bit of that sandbar that used to be about 6 or 8 feet wide by 50 feet long. There's one little bit left. You can see this is a little bit later on. The water's infiltrating. This is what the brush bundle looks like more close up. You can see how I said the water kind of flows in there. When it flows in there, it mingles with that brush, slows down, drops the sediment. The interesting thing is this is shortly after we put the brush bundles in, the water infiltrating in there. It's almost the same picture. This is almost that same picture that next spring. And you can see all the sand in here where the brush all used to be, just a little bit of brush sticking up out of it. You can see in the center of the river, it's just a flowing river. There's no sandbar at all anymore. So that was, I said, that was one of the interesting things about this particular project. This is from the bridge looking down. Again, this is in the spring when the water's up a little bit, so you can see it's on top of the rocks. You can see how the rocks kind of nicely channel that water into where it should be to get it inside the brush. You can see the river, the natural river channel follows right down through there. It doesn't pop out, an extra 20-some feet wide as it gets under the bridge. So next steps, we'll go back, of course, this spring. This is an area where you can't get to in the wintertime. They don't plow H58 in that area. So this coming spring, we'll get in there again, assess how things are doing. We may add a little bit more rock. You see the river in the spring comes completely over all the rocks. What we'd like to do is add not a full layer, but add a little bit of rock on the top to make that water kind of snake around a little bit, slow down, and drop more sediment in those rocks. So it's dropping some now, but not as much as we'd like it to. So anyway, just again to give you a good example of what was done, and with very low key, very low budget, and I mentioned moving about 15 tons of rocks, over 9 truckloads of brush. We had a total of about 20 people over the 2 days. There was about 10 or 12 people each day, not all the exact same people, but a total of about 20 people moved all that stuff in a matter of 2 days. So anyway, just a good example of a local hands-on project. That's a lot of the type of stuff that we get involved in with the local chapter, is planning and implementing a lot of that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I want to make sure we have a chance for Connor to get up. He's got a lot of good stuff to show you. We will be around if you have specific questions you want to ask any of us, either at the very end or even afterwards. We'll stick around for a while if you want to talk about things, ask questions about the projects. If you want to talk about TU, any things we're doing, if you want to talk about fishing, we'll be here.
I sent my text to both of those work days, but I just had so much office work to do. I could not make it myself. Bummer.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the time, yeah, you were pretty quick. Yeah, you only 8 minutes. Yeah, right.
You guys hear me okay? No? Okay, now can you guys hear me okay? Probably. It's already 7:37, maybe a little bit past. I checked the time. So just as forewarning, if 8 p.m. rolls around and I'm still up here kind of chattering about, I'm not offended by any of you needing to go attend to whatever responsibilities you need to go to. I get it. And I admit there's a couple slides on here that are a little wordier than I think is probably acceptable for presentation period, let alone one for Superior on Tap. So be patient with me. But I get it. If we go long and you can walk out, all good. So hi, thanks for having me here. Fred Waara, to you especially, thank you for having me here and dedicating some funds and time to my research that I'm going to talk about today. And then CL, Citizens for Safe and Clean Lake Superior, Chris in particular, thank you for having me and getting me out here. Excited to be here. So the title, which is a mouthful, for my master's work is Response to Benthic Stream Macroinvertibrates to Experimental Removal of Fine Sediments in Marquette County, Salmon Trout River. It's a mouthful. Essentially, how is sand and macroinvertebrates changing together in response to the sand removal restoration that occurred on this stream? The reason why I say Marquette County Salmon Trout River and not just Salmon Trout River is there's multiple salmon trout rivers in the UP that I've learned about, one of which is over in Houghton County. I'm a QNL resident now. So that's the one that comes to mind for me. Not the most original name when I'm thinking about naming a river, but I think some of the European settlers, when they showed up, they just saw trout that looked like salmon, and that was about as far as they could go. So, and advancing, yeah, there we go. All right, so a little more background. Here's a nice little map of the Salmon Trout River watershed. So if you're from the area, which I assume most of you are, this is just located a few miles northwest of here. So that's Big Bay. Here's the Huron Mountain Club. And then the Salmon Trout River watershed is kind of nested right to the east of the Huron Mountain Club, southeast of the Huron Mountain Club. This is a flow path map that I've created. So essentially it's modeling or mapping not only annual streams, but also looking at surface flows that are ephemeral, that might not be happening year-round. So I just have a little bit of it blown up on the left there. You don't need to look at any one of these particular fingers of the watershed too much. It's just to show that this is a complex drainage. And there's a lot more sources of water into these streams than come from the channels themselves, these annual channels. There's a lot of water that flows over the surface, and these ephemeral streams carrying a lot of sediment as well. This yellow dot, if you're not colorblind, there's a little yellow dot right here. That's approximately the location of the restoration site that I'm going to be talking about more today. Here's another map. So this is a DEM, or a digital elevation model of the watershed. So you'll notice there's a lot more relief, or a little more topography out here in the central part of the watershed. That's kind of the Huron Mountain Formation, those big granite peaks and bluffs. At the top of the watershed, which is further south, I know it's a little bit hard to conceptualize in that respect, but at the headwaters here, that's the north edge of the Yellow Dog Plains. So folks that are familiar with the Yellow Dog River, you know this area pretty well. And I think it speaks volumes to the sense, again, that this is a complex watershed. It has landforms that are very sandy and related to glacial outwash plains at the headwaters. It flows through this steep section that's kind of mostly granite bluffs. There's a couple waterfalls in here that then segment out this lower part of the watershed that's kind of flat, more akin to the headwaters, and very sandy as well. And I have this blown up section of the mouth of the stream here. And I know that it's not easy to see, but you can see there's a little bit of a stream channel. That's the Salmon Trout River flowing north towards its outlet with Lake Superior. And you can notice there's a little ridges. Those are old lakeshore shorelines from Lake Superior when the water was higher. This is a really cool dune swale wetland complex out there. Anybody that's traveled that way or has the opportunity to be on Huron Mountain Club property in that area, you know this wetland. Pretty interesting, and I think, again, just speaks to the complexity of the habitat and the landforms that this stream is flowing through and how much sand that it's truly dealing with. It's a sandy stream. So in the early 2000s, even this lower part of the watershed wasn't predominantly sandy. There was pockets of cobbly habitat and rocky habitat. By the late 2000s, the historically rocky spawning sites were buried. And when I say spawning sites, I'm really referring to the spawning of coaster brook trout. So Emma has talked about it a little bit today. Coaster brook trout, these are fish that are migrating from Lake Superior into some inland tributary to spawn, and then they go back out to the big lake to feed. They get a lot bigger than resident brook trout, but genetically, as Emma discussed, they are not different. They just have a life history that allows them to get a lot bigger and take advantage of a little more resources than these resident fish. So the Salmon Trout River, this stream, is host or home to one of these coastal brook trout populations. At the time, in the early 2000s, it was one of the larger populations and one of the only known populations on the south shore of Lake Superior. It's since become known that there's other populations, and there's really good work in the works too with TU to identify some of these other populations of coasters on the south shore. But the Salmon Trout River and the Huron Mountain Club in this area is one of those kind of, it was a foundational population to understand that these fish are still here and they're doing pretty good. But one of the problems in this system, and that many are experiencing up here, is this aggradation, or this continued deposition of sand on these historically rocky sites. So this figure on the bottom left basically shows what's going on in the salmon trout watershed. So you have this stored sand. Imagine this is sand from streams in the headwaters, like the Yellow Dog Outwash Plain. It's moving through that faster section of the watershed where it's maybe a little more granite, bluffs, a lot more gradient. And then it's dumping into that lower portion of the watershed, maybe where you've seen those dune swale maps. And this is kind of what's happening. We were getting this aggradation of these fine sediments. Historically, the stream was able to push these sands out and still keep some of these rocky substrates available for fish. But in the mid-2000s, there was a lot of logging that occurred on industrial lands in the headwaters of this stream. And there's also a number of road stream crossings, as Emma mentioned earlier, and John also pointed out, there's a couple of road stream crossings that are a problem in this watershed. So moving on. So to remediate that, Casey Huckins, he's a professor and a researcher at Michigan Tech, he's my advisor for my graduate program. He figured out this plan, or at least some type of experimental design, to try to remove some of the sand to restore spawning habitat for these brook trout. So on the far left, there's an image of them hand sucking, or they're using like a hand wand setup to remove sand. So they're physically going in and kind of dredging out sands just with a vacuum pump by hand. The center image is a similar system. They're still pumping sand out of the stream, but it's kind of a fixed collector. So it's more of a cheese grater that's being installed in the middle of the stream. Sand's flowing into it. Then there's a pump on the bank that a technician like me would turn on, and it's going to pull the sand out of the stream. And then it's dumping it into this site here. It is out of the floodplain. It is closer to the stream than I would prefer, but again, it is out of that floodplain, meaning that it's not within risk of a 1 in 100 year kind of flood event of being put back into the stream. So that sand is being removed from the spawning site and put out of the stream. One thing to be clear is in the mid-2000s, that's when the sand started getting bad. Around 2011, this occurred. So that's where these pictures are from, is around 2011. About 10 years went by, 2021 comes around, and Casey Huckins, my advisor, in my lab started to notice that these sediments are aggrading again on these spawning sites. And they're not allowing these coastal brook trout to spawn. So another major restoration was planned to remove sand from the stream very similarly to this process. So there is hand wand being used to remove the sand, there is an in-stream collector, and they're pumping them out of the floodplain. So some of the rationale for my research and my specific project, well, the benefits of sand removal in this critical brook trout habitat are clear. The population and community level benefits of macroinvertebrates, or 2 macroinvertebrates, from that removal have not been understood, have not been examined. So essentially, we know that the sand removal is improving habitat for the coasters. What is it doing to the things that the coasters eat? That's my question. So some of the main food items that are available for invertebrates in stream ecosystems are sea palm, F-palm, periphyton, and prey. Sea palm, coarse particulate organic matter. So think like leaves, branches. F-palm is fine particulate organic matter. Think poop, or maybe think bug poop, if you want to think about it in a little less, or maybe more pleasant way. But essentially, we've got that coarse particulate matter that's been eaten, digested, pooped out maybe, or maybe it's just slowly broken down over time. It turns into F-palm. And then periphyton, that's algae or bacteria, diatoms that are growing on top of rocks. There's rocky substrates on the stream. They're getting sun or light energy from the sun. They have a nice rocky substrate to grow and kind of colonize. Maybe imagine like coral on a reef. That's kind of a similar situation to periphyton. And then prey. So prey is any invertebrate that's being eaten by another invertebrate. And I have a little bit of a diagram here showing kind of this food web structure. I won't go into it too much, but understand that there's these 4 major different food sources, and invertebrates vary on what they can eat based on their mouth parts. And that's what I'm going to get into. And I know this is too much text, so I'm going to try to go through it quickly. But I kind of just said that invertebrate mouthpart morphology limits how they obtain food. So invertebrates can then be classified based on that knowledge into functional feeding groups. This can get really into the weeds, but for today, and just to keep things simple, I'm talking about 5 major functional feeding groups, if I did my math right there. So shredders, collectors, scrapers, piercers, or piercer herbivores, and predators. Shredders, those are invertebrates that are physically shredding like leaf material. That's CPOM. They want CPOM. So they're shredding detrital material that's been collected on the stream bed. Typically that's associated with coarser substrate, right? If it's really sandy, there's not a lot of pockets for this coarse particulate material to stay and then be colonized by bacteria, other diatoms that macroinvertebrate shredders like to eat. Collectors, this is kind of a broad category, but there's collector filterers and collector gatherers. So there's invertebrates that will physically move around the stream bed, collecting fine particulate organic matter, so smaller pieces of organic matter. And then there's collector filters. These are invertebrates that are actually fixing themselves to the stream bed in some way. Think of like a caddisfly larva oftentimes. And they're grabbing material or fine particulates out of the column. Piercer herbivores are relatively less common, and think like aphids or a sap-sucking insect, something that's getting nutrients from a living plant. That's what these piercer herbivores is referring to. And then predators, it's more self-explanatory, something that's eating another macroinvertebrate. The functional feeding group approach, or functional feeding group approach, is informative that allows assessment to the degree which invertebrate biota of a given stream is dependent on a particular food source. So think again, the CPOM, FPOM. In theory, altered land use or a shift in sediment regime, so maybe there's a perched culvert that's getting worse and worse, or there was a giant clear cut that occurred in the headwaters of a stream, that should alter the amount of available FPOM and CPOM present, and thus the proportion of functional feeding groups. Okay, more text. Awesome. You're sleeping. Broad research questions. So some of the questions that I'm trying to answer with this research. How do stream insects and streambed sand change together across space and time? That's more of just a general question. I think that there's a lot of room for interpretation there, and I'm not kind of pigeonholing myself into one place and saying that there should be a positive response from this restoration or there shouldn't be. More of, I just want to understand how are invertebrates and sand correlating to each other. More on the restoration side of things, will macroinvertebrate community structures shift away from taxa associated with large exposed particles? And then will the abundance and biomass of macroinvertebrates increase following reduction of sand and exposure of larger particles? Hypotheses here for my research or for this project, just really basic ones. If you want to think about it in the kind of the alternate null hypothesis testing, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. But essentially, rocky substrates favor community composition more representative of an undegraded cold water stream. That's what I'm hypothesizing. Very simple, I think testable, and there's a lot of proof out there, I think, to show that there is correlation between improved invertebrate community diversity and health and larger or more amounts of coarse substrates. Another way to think about this is sandy substrates favor collector-gatherers, so that's that one functional feeding group, these gatherers, because fine sediments largely accumulate FPOM, so that fine particulate material, whereas coarse rocky substrates predominantly accumulate CPOM. Great, more text, wonderful. Some of the predictions that I have for this, I'll just keep this one simple. Increases in total abundance and biomass. I expect that removal of sand, the exposure of larger substrate, that's going to cause an increase in macroinvertebrate abundance and biomass. I have a couple other more specific predictions here about the community and how it would change. I'm going to skip past those just for the sake of time. Okay, so sampling timeline here on the Salmon Trout River. When were these surveys conducted? When was the sediment removed? So pre-restoration surveys were conducted in 2020 and 2021. In 2020, we only had 2 sampling events. In 2021, there was 4. Just the product of how scheduling kind of worked out. I think COVID played into that a little bit. It feels so long ago now. And then at the end of the season in 2021, after that pre-restoration sampling was done, so invertebrates were collected, sediments were measured, the 30 cubic yards approximately of sand was removed from the restoration site. So that was sand that was dumped out upland, out of the floodplain. And then in 2022, after that sand removal occurred, replicate surveys were done in June and July to try to understand some type of post-restoration response. And I have a little picture there, some Aetheristidae, that's Diptera or Dipteran larvae, or true fly larvae. So Diptera, true fly. Look kind of gross, kind of grubby. Maybe not my favorite one to look at. I see a lot of them. Okay, field macroinvertebrate sampling. So how did I collect these bugs and where was I? I don't know if that's it's not the proper methodology to use a Hess sampler. I have since learned that. But what is a Hess sampler? And so a Hess sampler is what I use to collect these macroinvertebrates. This is a picture of one here on the right. It's essentially a glorified trash can is really all it is, with a bag on it. I guess trash can has a bag in it. This one's attached to it. Anyways, I would use this Hess sampler to collect samples. The Hess sampler is good for this project because it's isolating the benthic community. And when I say benthic community, it's the community of invertebrates that's living on the bottom of the stream. I'm not focusing this research on stuff that's flowing down the stream or might be using more of the water column. I'm really trying to understand how the community is shifting in relation to the substrate. So this sampling device kind of forms like a seal. You're kind of grinding it into the stream bed. You have this kind of fixed area now, and you don't have a lot of room for these invertebrates to escape, per se, as you're collecting them. That is a picture of me collecting some invertebrates. Again, you're not supposed to be underwater when you're using the Hess. The Hess sampler is supposed to be about a ½ meter and shallower. That is probably about 1 meter. The reason why I was doing that is, one, because I was a sophomore in my undergrad and I didn't know any better. And then two, and I'll make this one more defendable, is that the stream had changed so much from pre-restoration that it actually got a lot deeper. And that makes sense, right? Because we removed a lot of that sediment. Sand was put out of the system, the channel got deeper, and in order to maintain some level of standardization or consistency between the pre-restoration sampling that was done also with the Hess, I wanted to do the same thing. And I guess I wanted to get really wet. So. Cool. Sampling design. So basically this is what was happening. I know I showed those pictures of the sediment being removed and they had those vacuum systems earlier. If you use your imagination, this is that right here. So this would be the restoration site, and then I had an upstream reference site, a downstream reference site. So these are spatially or physically much closer to the restoration site. So trying to understand that 30 cubic yards of sand that was pulled out of here, is it having an effect upstream or downstream on the community? We'd expect that it has some. And then the Rocky reference, I say it's a Rocky reference. This was kind of a control site that was set up in 2020. At the time, it was a lot rockier. Funnily enough, by the end of the study, 2022 rolled around, there is a lot of sediment moving in here. Not as a relation to our removal down here, it's something else, another plume of sand that's moving down the system. So I don't know how well that one works as a Rocky reference. Maybe it's just another site. I'm going to find out as I work through this data. But finally, pictures. Holy crap, pictures. So sand. No? Okay. So the downstream reference, it's sandy, right? This is kind of what I saw when I showed up in 2022, and I was shocked by it because I kind of figured hey, these guys just pulled out 30 cubic yards of sand, and I don't think I made this clear. I didn't show up on this research project until 2022. So I was a lowly undergrad looking for some time to get some experience, and I was brought out onto this project while this post-restoration sampling was being done. I should have explained that. Anyways, this is kind of what I saw. The downstream reference didn't look that rocky. Restoration site, okay, it's a little bit better. I think this is a tag alder bush, so maybe not the best photo, but you can see we've actually got cobble. We've got some hard substrate, some rocky substrate that's actually being exposed here. And then the upstream reference, what does that look like? Sand, a lot of sand, oh my gosh. And then the rocky control, okay, maybe I lied a little bit, but yeah, it's kind of rocky, and maybe it's just because of that beaver dam. So using this as a control reference site, I'm probably going to have some problems with as I go on with my thesis here, but if anything else, it's representative of the natural variation in the street. Some lab methods. So once I collected these macroinvertebrates, what do? I have like tens of thousands of these things preserved in ethanol now. I don't know what to do. They're just staring at me with their like lifeless eyes. So I identify them to lowest taxonomic level. And if you don't know what taxonomic level is, that's okay. It's just the scale, the sliding scale we use to describe where an organism fits in evolution. And so I'm going down to genus, which I'm just trying to compare that. Maybe like a white pine. Most people know about white pine. A lot of people, you can point out a white pine if they're forestry oriented or something and say, that's Pinus strobus. And so they got it down to species already. It's like, it doesn't happen for invertebrates. You can't do it. You can't look at, maybe some really big nerd out there can. I can't. I haven't figured it out yet. So I have to use a microscope, which you can see here. And I'm individually measuring and identifying every single one of these from these samples. It sounded a lot easier when I started this work. And so it's gotten a lot harder. But it's good. And why am I measuring them? So why am I not just identifying them and saying, okay, well, I counted 25 of these mayflies and 60 of these stoneflies. Measuring them allows me, if I plan these right, to calculate their biomass. And biomass might tell you a little bit more about how a system's functioning. Diversity does something. Abundance is okay. But variation between year to year, if you're looking at biomass, or in other words, how much energy or how many calories that system is providing, that might tell you something a little bit more meaningful about the response to the restoration, or the stream really improving. So I'm not going to get into this formula really much. This is just an example, but basically, some guy that was way worse off than me spent a long time measuring a lot of one specific kind of mayfly, or one specific kind of stonefly, one specific kind of bug, and they measured it so many times, and they got an exact weight of that individual that they were able to create some type of regression and develop an equation that I can steal from them, and then use the lengths that I measure. So this is an example of this is Terra narcis or Terra narcidae. This is a stonefly larvae. Some of you may have seen something like this before. Maybe you didn't know what it was. They look kind of scary, but I think they're kind of cool. But basically, if this was 30 millimeters per example, I would plug that into this equation. It shoots out 109 milligrams dry mass. That's essentially the biomass that I'm getting. So it is an estimate. I'm using equations to estimate these. It's about the best I can do, I think, in somewhat of a timely manner. But that's why I'm measuring them. And so this image on the bottom right, there's a couple Physella or gastropod shells here. So that's a snail. I guess in terms of functional feeding groups, just to throw it out there, that top one is predominantly a shredder, so it's shredding a lot of detrital material. It will also engulf animals secondarily, so that stonefly on the top can act as a predator. And then the snails on the bottom, really only one functional feeding group we assign to those, scrapers. They're slowly moving around the periphyton, scraping it away on these rocks. I don't know, not important. Okay, so some preliminary results. Streambed sand. Yes, these are box plots that I made in Excel. It's really ignoring, but they're box plots nonetheless. And you can see that sand did go down post-restoration, at least I think it did. The standard deviation of the sand depth here starts to kind of overlap a little bit. I don't know, it's going below 0. That's weird. But what I do know is there's a trend, right? And it kind of makes sense. I would expect that the sand went down after we removed 30 cubic yards of it. The reason why I still think it's significant that this trend is showing up is this was sampled a year after that sand was removed. And since streams are so dynamic and there's so much variation going on, to me it's significant that this site is still coarser or rockier than it was pre-restoration. That there wasn't this giant sand plume immediately upstream that was just going to bury this site one more time. That may have been what has occurred since. But it's important, I think, to know that this sand removal, the way that our lab did it, did have some level of long-lasting effect in terms of improving that substrate condition. There's going to be a lot more like fine-tuned, I think, data analysis that's going to have to come in here. These are really kind of summary statistics here. Okay, box plots, woohoo! I think I did this to make it easier. Yay. Nope, go back. Okay, so these are abundance, so it's just looking at like the number of individuals you'd expect to find approximately per square meter of the stream. So we've got our different functional feeding groups down here: filterer, gatherer, piercer, predator, scraper, and shredder. I'm really kind of thinking about the shredder, the scraper, and the filterers when I look at this data, just because those 3 functional feeding groups, those are the 3 that are most associated with that coarse substrate and the ones that I think would respond the most to this restoration. Because again, they're focused on eating CPOM, that coarse particulate matter that's really associated with rocky substrate. So we have June 2021 data on the left and then June 2022 data on the right. So it's just one sampling event I'm comparing here. And just in general, the biomass or the abundance went down. A little interesting, not exactly what I was expecting, that it would go down like that. Again, since we've improved the habitat in terms of having more space, more stuff to eat, I kind of hypothesized it'd go up. The piercer group, this herbivore group, went up a lot, so it was basically non-existent in the 2021 data. 2022, it was starting to become a little bit more apparent. And that's really just because of these guys. I looked into it, and it's just Hydroptilidae. So if you don't know Hydroptilidae, which I imagine 99.9% of you don't, it's a purse maker caddis fly. So many caddis larvae, and when I say caddis larvae, that's Trichoptera is the taxonomic order that's associated with it. But we see a lot of these flies like on the lake edge, or maybe if you some people call them mattress thrashers. I don't know if that's really the right term anymore. But they flutter around. They have a really pretty flight pattern. And that one went up a lot post-restoration. I don't know exactly if that was really an effect of the restoration being successful, but these guys do need some type of hard substrate to hang out in. And since they're piercers, or they can be herbivore piercers, maybe that suggests there's some more macrophyte growth going on in this area. That seems to make sense if there was more rocky substrate, but honestly, probably looking a little bit too fine-tuned. I just think it's neat to throw it out there. Hydroptilidae, they're cute. And you can't see the length on that, but that's 2 millimeters long. So he's really tiny, but they're cute. Okay, proportional abundance, more box, or that was a bar graph. I don't really need to get too far into this. I guess that's kind of interesting. Yeah, so the abundance, again, we just talked about it, but this is like the proportion of abundance. So like how much does each of these functional feeding groups contribute to the total abundance? Basically, the biggest trend that I noticed was these predators went down a lot in 2022. And then again, we saw these piercers or those Hydroptilidae go up. Not too sure what to make of it, other than the fact that it kind of makes sense to me that the proportional abundance went down across the board if the net abundance went down as well. So biomass, now steering away, these are very similar plots that I just showed you, but instead of abundance, we're looking at biomass. So I think maybe more telling of the ecologic condition. It's telling something about energy and how much energy is available. And so in June 2021, that's the plot on the left. June 2022 is the plot on the right. Bummer. It went down a lot across the board. Big arrow, big red arrow going down. So not exactly what I was expecting, really, at all. I really thought that biomass, if anything, was at least hold kind of steady, to be similar to the pre-restoration conditions, but I was really expecting it to go up. Something that I will have to dive into more. I guess, is there anything about this? Proportional biomass. Okay, this one's kind of interesting to look at, more so than just the net biomass. Because you can see that at least in 2022, yes, everything went down, but in this shredder group, we had about a 20% increase in the proportion of the total biomass that it's contributing to. So in simple terms, there's more shredders, or maybe not necessarily more shredders, but the shredders that are existing in the stream in 2022 are contributing more to the total amount of energy that's available. So potentially there's more transfer of energy, there's more CPOM maybe that's contributing to these shredders. If there's more CPOM, maybe that means there's kind of an improved habitat condition for things like the brook trout. Hard to say with data like this, but maybe there's a potential there. There's Pteronarcidae again, Pteronarcis, yay, fun shredder. Support for hypotheses, maybe, I don't know. What about EPT taxa? So I haven't talked about these at all, but EPT taxa is kind of a common baseline metric that's used in macroinvertebrate assessments. So Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, and Trichoptera, that's what constitutes EPT taxa. If, in simple terms, that's mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. The reason why these are kind of looked at under a little more of a fine-tooth comb by stream ecologists is because that generally they're considered to be a little more susceptible to pollution. So we have kind of these different ranges that are thrown out there by a couple different pieces of literature. If you have more than 50% EPT taxa, so that means that if, let's say you have 1,000 invertebrates and 500 of them or more are invertebrates that constitute mayflies, stoneflies, or caddisflies, then you're going to have an excellent score, or that this site is a reference. It could be a reference condition. There's a lot of really good habitat components. 35 to 50 is good or fully supporting. 20 to 35 is fair to some impairment. 0 to 20 is poor to impaired. Again, this is like a 30,000 foot perspective on the stream health. Isn't meant to be interpreted to a fine point, but we do see, unfortunately, that in 2022, that EPT taxa went down, both in abundance and biomass for the stream. I think it's interesting to note that more than half of the biomass in both years of all invertebrates that were collected, which is, I think, in this data set that I'm talking about tonight, is about 8,000 invertebrates that I looked through. More than half of them are EPT, or more than half the biomass is EPT. So I think that's kind of neat, and it says something about there's good energy transfer happening, but in terms of that abundance, that overall number, we're still kind of in that like poor and paired zone, which is kind of ironic to think about. We're in this remote part of the UP. There's poster brook trout that are still trying to spawn here, but it says something about the insidious nature of sand and what it's doing. So in sum, neither EPT metric really supports my hypotheses. Sad. Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, Trichoptera, I know I haven't given you enough visuals of invertebrates tonight, but that is an example of a mayfly. That's an example of a stonefly. That's an example of a caddisfly. I know there's a couple fly fishermen, or maybe a lot of fly fishermen in the room tonight, so forgive me if I'm beating a dead horse there, but for the folks that haven't seen those before, didn't know, that was probably a good tease to provide earlier in the presentation. So some known limitations moving forward. So shifts in community composition, as I just kind of mentioned, should really be viewed at the 30,000 foot level through functional feeding groups. There's small any small changes that are happening pre or post restoration should be interpreted with caution. Incorporation of the entire data set, so I have more sampling events that I need to continue to look through. I kind of mentioned that many times. We had sampled this stream earlier. But once I incorporate the whole data set, it should improve the stats that I'm providing or that I'm producing, and maybe improve or show that there is an improved restoration impact with a bigger data set. It's hard to say with these poor results. And then for you stats nerds, you'll like this sentence. For anybody else, just read it for like 2 seconds. Cool. All right, so why does any of this matter? why does it matter, I guess? I mean, here, ecological linkages, somebody talked about it. Why do bugs matter? Why do we care about bugs?
They feed fish.
They feed fish, okay, so that's like the ecological linkage here, and then I guess there's that recreation component, right? They feed fish. So I think something that's kind of important to talk about, or at least just note, is that globally there's reported declines of both aquatic and terrestrial invertebrate populations across the board. The mechanisms for this may be a lot more complicated, and maybe it's not just glyphosate or something that you're seeing on the news that's causing this to happen, but it's happening. There's aquatic and terrestrial populations are declining. And then something that's kind of unique to the Salmon Trout River, and I think why these invertebrates are important, it's a coastal brook trout spawning habitat, right? It's a coastal brook trout stream. They're regionally rare, with few known populations remaining in the Lake Superior Basin, although I know good folks at Trout Unlimited are trying to improve knowledge on that and are going to. But this was a fish that was the dominant predator in Lake Superior not even 200 years ago. So that in itself, I think, says something about the unique situation that invertebrates play, at least in this system. Just kind of mentioned it, recreation, fly fishing, trying to match a hatch, that kind of thing. That's important for invertebrates, so it's important to know about invertebrates, have some type of baseline there. And then I think this third point is something that I at least wanted to hit home, and I have no idea what time it is anymore, so I apologize if, again, we're running late. But relationship building and appreciating the little things is something that I think is why invertebrates matter. And so there's these two words I'm going to throw out here, manadunes and manadunsag, or manadusag. They're Ojibwe words, and that is an Ojibwe term, or the Ojibwe term for bugs, or what you would translate to bug. Does anybody know what that means or what they mean? Just curious. There's somebody in the back.
Little people?
Little people, little spirits. Little spirit, but little people is, I think, probably synergist to that term, or to the translation. And that's profound to me. The fact that I think it's all too common today that we will see a bug and it's just like gone. It's like, why is that thing on me? And I know mosquitoes suck, ticks suck, all these things, right? Which a lot of the bugs that we hate, they start their lives in the stream, by the way. Sorry. But manadunes, manadusag, these terms to consider that these are spirits, these are beings. It's not just something that you disregard and stomp and walk away. You can feel that way about it if you'd like, but I think that's not a very enriching way to live your life. And after I've spent all this time looking at these invertebrates, staring at them after they're lifeless, looking at me, one thing that I really have picked up on are their eyes. Maybe they don't have the level of consciousness that I associate, with higher level beings, but they've got eyes, and they're interpreting the world in their own little way, maybe if they're living in a much shorter time frame. But if you're curious and you're interested about what I'm saying, this read by Wendy Genius, the Manadunes, Manadouche, Bugs in Ojibwe Culture, really highly recommend. If you're like, man, that hippy-dippy stuff's not for me, then I guess they're bugs to you. But realize that I think there's a little bit more to it than that. Finally, a worthwhile resource for anybody, and if you have a phone in front of you right now, or you're already texting somebody because you're like, when is it going to end? macroinvertibrates.org is a really good reference. And so this is a free website. There's also an app. So if you go to your app store, whatever phone you're on, if you need another app, you probably don't. But if you want one, they also have an associated app, macroinvertibrates.org. And it's basically like a taxonomic key that you can have in your pocket. And it doesn't go to like species level or anything, but it gives you a lot of really good images of invertebrates and gives you a taste at like some of the diversity that you could expect to see when you step out into a stream in your backyard. So if you have a stream in your backyard. I wish I did. Maybe metaphorically, figuratively, if it's in your backyard. One day it will be there. And that's it. I don't have a question slide because this is not merged in with the TU presentation, but that's all I have for you guys. So on that note, can anybody tell me what that is? I mean, mayfly? Who said mayfly? Dragonfly. Stonefly. Stonefly. You guys learned anything tonight? That's a stonefly. No, it'd be fun to go to taxonomy. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, fair. Yeah, I mean, I'll take questions for myself, but also I know if Emma or John, if you guys had questions for them, or anything that you feel like commenting on, or you have a fun story to tell me. You got bit by a hellgrammite before? I know. Have you been, is that an, okay, a question.
So the aggradation of sand in the streams is continuously happening. What factors are causing it to continuously happen? Are we continuing to see like similar logging practices that are causing that? Are there other factors?
Yeah, at least in this, good question, first of all. So the question was kind of, to restate, we have this kind of continued chain reaction happening in the stream. Sand is kind of constantly being deposited into the stream. Also, that's just what streams do. They're naturally erosional and depositional, so they want to be moving sediment. But in the context of this watershed, I believe the question was, what are some of the main sources to this continued sand deposition? I wish I had a good answer for it, but my hypothesis is in the early to mid-2000s when this started to get bad, when I say bad, I don't like using that term, when things started to get sandier than historically we know of, in the early to mid-2000s, it really lined up well with some industrial forestry practices that were happening on the edge of the Yellow Dog Plain and in some of the private holdings on the headwaters of the salmon trout. And so the theory was that there was kind of this really big influx of sand that was largely related to those events that also coincided with a really high rain spring. So a lot of rains happening in the spring. If I could find the year in my head, I would bring it up. But again, I guess what I'm getting at is we have these compounding effects of there's this pretty intense logging harvest that occurred in the headwaters that combined with this really wet spring and then led to like a normal influx of sand. And my thinking is that we have not fully recovered from that initial like heavy disturbance that happened. And so there's this kind of this plume that's sort of rolling down, and some years it looks better, some years it looks worse. But to kind of answer your question, some of the continuing main inputs that I know about are some of the road stream crossings that exist in the headwaters. So some of the road stream crossings, they have been marked already by folks on the Salmon Trout River Advisory Plan. There's some really good researchers, some of which may be in this room, I'm unsure. So road stream crossings is probably the major input, but it's hard to say, I guess, at the end of the day. It's an insidious thing. And it's natural, that's what's hard about it. And this stream is, and I wanted to say this, and I know I'm just talking at you guys, but this stream is only 5,000 to 6,000 years old, so yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is from the extreme weather events we've been having.
Yeah.
You know, we're having more 100-year floods or 50-year floods, whatever. You know, we're having more extremes in weather. You know, maybe like right now there's like 4 or 5 feet of snow on the ground up there in headwaters.
Yep.
You know, but come spring we might get a week of
A rain. Yeah.
days, hey.
And that's what happened to the Silver Lake Basin,
You know,
correct?
so,
Yeah.
yeah, that sort of thing.
Yep.
We've had more and more of that sort of thing happening, and so you have these events that flush more down.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Random.
In the back?
A year seems like a fairly short amount of time to get some results on that environment and nature take its course. Are you going back to do some more sampling to see what happens in 2, 3, 5 years?
Yep, that's a really good question. So I was mentioned that a year seems like a really short time to see some type of environmental response to this restoration, and I totally agree with that. I think it's too short. My I guess answer to that is that I have additional samples that I'm going to compile into this data set, so more sampling events that had occurred over the 2022 season post-restoration. I'm hoping that will kind of bolster it a little bit, but at the end of the day, it is kind of limited in scope in terms of how far out can I say, or how long-lasting was this restoration event. By having only 1 year of post-restoration, it's not a lot. I think answering questions about how invertebrates are associating with habitat conditions as they are in the moment, I think there's something to be said there. There's some value there. The part of the reason why I'm walking around like, I'm going to go back out and continue to collect data, so the property that this site is located on is within the Huron Mountain Club property. and not that my advisor in our lab doesn't have a good relationship with those folks, but just logistically trying to get access and permits to get in there can be difficult. And then the funding that was supporting a lot of this research has dried up. So yeah, it's unfortunate. But ideally, yes, I would love to go back and take some samples.
Kind of tied in with that question as far as recovery time, was any consideration put into how many invertebrates were lost in the sand removal? Was any count done up in that sand?
That's a really good question. No, but part of the reason I suppose would just be that sand removal, the major restoration, and I know I didn't explain this super well in the talk, that occurred at the end of the sampling season in 2021. So pre-restoration surveys, trying to get an idea of what that condition was like before the sand was removed, that was all done. And then we had the entire winter basically occurred until sampling happened again the following spring. So that's kind of, I guess my answer to that is we didn't estimate or account for inverts that might have been killed or lost with the sand removal because enough time had passed in our minds that the invertebrates were able to recolonize that new habitat. A lot of these invertebrates do live on pretty short life cycles, so they might have multiple generations in a year. That's not always the case. There are examples where some of these invertebrates spend years underwater. So it's just, yeah, the data gets really messy. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question. Anybody else? I'll probably put it.
Thank you, Connor.
Yeah. No, that's a question. There's one more question. Sorry.
The water table in that area has been falling since about 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So have you normalized your data for just a lower stream stage?
That's an interesting question. No, I have not. And I think that would be something that would definitely be worth doing moving forward. Is that data that's available through the gauge that's on?
I'm just speaking, we do, I come into stream sampling for like Eagle 9.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think in their annual reports.
They've been able to prove. Okay. That is something that I should account for sure. And no, I have not yet. So yeah, we might have to talk after a little bit too. All right, thank you guys.
Just real quick, couple of announcements. You see right here, March 11th, Taiwan. We're going to do a fly tying event right here at the Ore Dock. If you're interested in learning how to tie a fly, come on out. No experience necessary. If you tie flies, you want to bring your own equipment out and just hang out with us and tie some flies, great. If you just want to come out and see what these geeks do when they tie flies, come on out and join us. So that's on the March 11th. A month later, April 11th, we'll be having our biggest fundraiser and community event of the year, the UP Fly Fishing Film Festival. We'll be on the campus of Northern Michigan University at the ballrooms, and we've got all the films we've personally selected. We're not doing a general international film festival or anything. These are all films were made right here in the upper Midwest. Most of these films are all trout and salmon, Coldwater films from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Matter of fact, 3 of the films, I believe, were made just for us for this film festival. So it's going to be a good time. We're going to have a lot of conservation organizations there. We're going to have food. There's going to be beverages. There's going to be a lot of different representatives out there from fishing equipment. There's going to be guides and outfitters there. There's going to be a casting area. So if you want to try, if you've never tried fly fishing before and you want to give it a try, come on out. If you do fly fish, you want to try out some different rods, come on out. We've got some ways you can cast and things there. A lot of different things going on. It'll be a lot of fun. So put that date on your calendar, please. If you want more information, you can talk to us afterwards, or you can check out our website, Fred Waara Chapter TU. Chris, I think you have a few last words to say.
Yeah, just a few. Okay, I don't know about everyone else, but I'm equally impressed and exhausted by all the work that Trout Unlimited does up here. Thank you guys for everything you're doing. Just wanted to remind you of a couple other things. Our next Superior on Tap will follow this. It'll be on Thursday, March 12th, and we'll have representatives from Marquette County Conservation District talking about forest health. So that'll be happening for us in March, and we will also have a booth at the Fly Fishing Film Festival. So We've got a lot of collaborative events going on, so it's super cool. So thank you all again for joining us tonight, and to steal a little bit of the fly fishing lingo, we wish you all tight lines and gravel bottoms.